Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take complex information, pull out the essentials, and give you what you need to be, well, truly informed. Today we're jumping into a decision that, honestly, probably keeps a few security leaders up at night. It's about implementing privileged access management, PAM solutions. The big question is, do you bring in the pros, the professional services, or do you roll up your sleeves and go the do-it-yourself route, the DIY path? So our mission here is to really unpack the benefits, the drawbacks, and the best scenarios for each approach. We want to help you figure out which way makes the most sense for your organization, your specific needs, your goals. We're looking at a pretty detailed comparison document from Delinea. It lays out their professional services versus a DIY strategy. Okay, let's get into this. There's quite a bit to consider here, more than you might think at first glance, but we've got some solid insights from this comparison to guide us.
Yeah, it's fascinating, actually, how often organizations face this exact choice. And, it looks like it's just about cost on the surface, doesn't it? But it really goes much deeper than that. It's about control, it's about expertise, and it's definitely about your long-term strategy. And maybe just a quick primer for anyone less familiar with PAM. Basically, it's the system that manages and secures access for those super sensitive, privileged accounts. Think admin accounts, root accounts. The ones that can do real damage if they're compromised.
Right, the keys to the kingdom, essentially.
Exactly. So getting the implementation right it's absolutely critical. Our goal today is to give you a really clear, balanced view of both options, professional services and DIY.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start with the professional services side then. Let's pull back the curtain on what bringing in the specialists like Delinea's team really gets you.
Well, the first thing that jumps out, and it's a big one, is expertise.
Right.
You're getting access to Delinea certified professionals. These folks live and breathe this stuff. They have deep knowledge, not just of the Delinea tools, but of PAM principles in general, the common mistakes people make, the best ways to configure things securely.
So it's not just like ticking boxes on an installation checklist.
Yeah.
It's about leveraging actual experience.
Exactly. Years of collective experience, really. Which leads straight into the next point, efficiency. They generally promise a faster, more streamlined implementation because, well, they've done it before, many times. They use best practices they've honed over countless deployments.
So that saves your internal team from, reinventing the wheel or hitting common roadblocks?
Precisely. It can significantly cut down the time your own team would spend figuring things out. Plus, they can offer customized solutions. They tailor the deployment strategy to fit your specific business needs, your environment, and that's key because every organization is a bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And the comparison doc also mentioned compliance and ongoing support. It sounds like a huge deal, especially for regulated industries.
Oh, absolutely huge. Compliance assurance is a major benefit. They help make sure you're adhering to all those regulatory requirements, security standards. Think finance, healthcare, government.
Right. Getting that wrong isn't just a technical issue.
No way. It could mean massive fines, legal trouble, serious reputational damage. And then there's the ongoing support after implementation. You're not just left on your own if, a problem pops up or you need to handle an update. You've got dedicated support.
Okay, this all sounds pretty compelling, lots of benefits there. But let's be real, bringing in external experts almost always means a bigger upfront cost. What are the trade-offs, the potential downsides we need to consider?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And you hit the main one, cost. There's a higher upfront investment needed for professional services. While it might save internal time and potentially reduce long-term risk, that initial budget hit can be pretty significant, especially for smaller organizations, maybe ones with tighter budgets. That can be a real hurdle.
Okay, cost is number one. Anything else?
Well, there's also an element of dependency. You become reliant on those external folks, not just for the initial setup, but potentially for major updates or changes down the road.
So less internal knowledge building, maybe.
Potentially, yeah. And while they offer customization, sometimes there can be, let's say, subtle constraints based on their established processes. Maybe it doesn't fit perfectly with the super unique internal workflow you have. It's usually flexible, but maybe not infinitely so.
Gotcha. Okay, so given those pros and cons, when does it really make sense to lean into professional services? For you listening, trying to weigh this up, what are those ideal scenarios?
Well, if you connect this to the bigger picture, it often comes down to scale, complexity, and risk. Professional services really shine for, say, large-scale or particularly complex PAM deployments.
What defines complex in this context?
Good question. We're talking maybe lots of different systems to integrate with, like various directories, cloud platforms, maybe some older legacy systems, complex approval workflows, strict compliance needs that touch everything. Basically, situations where the potential for things to go wrong is high and the consequences are severe. A misstep in a complex setup isn't just a bug. It could open up major security holes or break compliance.
Okay, that makes sense. High-stakes environments.
Exactly. So if you're facing those strict compliance mandates, finance, healthcare, government, like we said, professional services are often critical. They know how to navigate that minefield. It's also ideal if you have limited internal resources. Maybe your IT team is stretched thin already, or they just don't have that deep, specific PAM expertise in-house. Building that takes time and money.
Right. Time you might not have if you need this deployed quickly.
Precisely. So urgent implementations, tight deadlines, pro services can get you there faster. And if you know you'll want ongoing dedicated support and maintenance long term, that's another strong indicator. So think mission critical deployments, complex environments, situations needing advanced, scalable configurations. Maybe you plan to expand PAM capabilities significantly over time. That's where leveraging their best practices really pays off.
All right, that paints a pretty clear picture for the professional services route, but like you said, that cost factor is real. So let's flip the coin. Let's talk about the do-it-yourself path, the DIY approach. What are the upsides of, taking the reins and handling a PAM rollout internally?
Well, the most obvious attraction, as you mentioned, is avoiding that big upfront cost of the professional services invoice. That's immediate budget relief, right?
Definitely. Frees up funds, potentially.
Yeah, it can make the project seem much more feasible, especially if budgets are tight. But it's not just about the money, is it?
No, I was thinking about control, too.
Exactly. DIY gives you full control, complete oversight. You can tweak and adjust the implementation process exactly how you want, when you want, without needing to go through an external team. And there's a really valuable aspect of skill development here. It's a fantastic chance for your internal team to get hands-on and build real, practical expertise with PAM systems.
Like an investment in your own people.
Absolutely. That in-house knowledge is gold for future maintenance, troubleshooting, scaling the system later on. You also get flexibility you can implement iteratively at your own pace. Maybe start small, learn, expand.
And you can be selective about where you spend money, right? Like specific tools or maybe just some targeted training.
Yeah. Right. You can allocate budget more granularly, focusing on the specific resources or training that fit your plan, rather than paying for a bundled service package.
Okay, so cost savings, control, skill building flexibility. Sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
But there's always a but, isn't there? If we connect this to the bigger picture, DIY sounds great, but what are the potential traps, the pitfalls, especially with something as sensitive as PAM?
Yeah, this is where you have to be really honest about your capabilities. The first potential pitfall is time. DIY implementation can take significantly longer, especially if your team is learning as they go.
Right, the learning curve can be steep.
Very steep. And every hour your internal team spends wrestling with PAM setup is an hour they're not spending on other critical tasks or strategic projects. That's a hidden cost, the opportunity cost. It's often underestimated.
And the risk factor.
That's the big one, honestly. There's a much higher risk of errors, misconfigurations, things that might seem minor but could actually compromise your security posture quite badly. With PAM, you're dealing with the most powerful accounts in your organization. One mistake, configuring permissions incorrectly, missing a critical integration point, it could be disastrous. That's not just a theoretical risk.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought. The keys to the kingdom argument again.
Exactly. And finally, it's just plain resource intensive. It demands significant time, focus, and effort from your internal team. You need to be sure you have those resources available and dedicated.
Okay, so time, risk of errors, resource drain. Those are serious considerations. So when does DIY make the most sense? When is it the right call, despite those risks?
Well, DIY can be a great fit for smaller scale deployments, maybe a pilot project, or if you're implementing PAM for a less critical segment of your infrastructure initially, kind of dipping your toes in.
Testing the water.
Right. It's also a strong contender if your organization is lucky enough to have an in-house IT team that already has significant PAM experience. Maybe they've implemented similar systems before, or you've hired people with that specific background.
So if the expertise is already there internally.
And obviously, if budget constraints are just the overriding factor, if the money for professional services simply isn't there, DIY might be the only option, and you just have to manage the risks carefully. It's also the path if your organization places a really high value on having absolute granular control over the entire process, maybe for specific strategic reasons.
And what about complexity?
Lower complexity use cases are definitely better suited for DIY. If the requirements are straightforward, compliance needs are minimal, the margin for error is a bit wider.
Makes sense. Less to go wrong.
Exactly. And if the primary goal is actually learning and building that internal skill set, if that's a strategic priority, then DIY is the way to achieve that directly. You accept it might be slower, but the knowledge gain is the main objective.
Okay, so cost-conscious organizations, lower stakes deployments, maybe phased approaches where you learn as you go.
Yes, exactly. A phased approach lets you build expertise iteratively. And finally, if you have time flexibility, if there are no urgent deadlines breathing down your neck, you have the luxury to proceed more cautiously and deliberately with the DIY approach.
You know, what's really fascinating here, listening to all this, is that there's clearly no single right answer. It really is about matching the approach to your specific situation, isn't it?
Absolutely. There's no magic formula. It's a balancing act.
It's like deciding whether to hire a general contractor for a major home renovation or trying to manage all the subcontractors yourself.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
One way gets it done faster, probably with fewer mistakes if you hire well but cost more. The other way, you save money up front, learn a lot, have total control, but wow, the potential for delays and headaches.
That's it, exactly. The choice really hinges on balancing those key factors. Your budget reality, your timeline pressures, the actual level of PAM expertise you have right now inside your team, and crucially, your organization's overall tolerance for risk. And I think it's really important to look beyond that upfront cost saving of DIY. You have to calculate the true total cost of ownership.
What do you mean by true cost?
Well, factor in the potential cost of security incidents if mistakes are made. Factor in the cost of delays. Factor in the opportunity cost. What else could your valuable internal team be doing with that time? Those often invisible costs need to be on the ledger when you compare.
That's a really critical point, the hidden costs. So thinking about our listener now, what does this all boil down to for you? As you're sitting there considering a PAM deployment, maybe you're planning one right now, you really need to ask some hard questions, don't you? Like, how absolutely critical is this specific PAM implementation to our security and operations? What resources, skilled people, available time do we genuinely have to throw at this? And maybe the toughest one, how much risk are we actually willing to accept if we try this ourselves and, well, maybe don't get it perfect the first time, especially when we're talking about access to our most sensitive assets? Okay, that was quite the deep dive into a really important decision point for anyone involved with PAM. We've really unpacked how both Delinea's professional services and the DIY approach have their own clear strengths, but also their weaknesses. And I think the main takeaway is that the best choice, well, it's always going to be situational. It depends entirely on your context. The scale, the complexity, the budget you have, the expertise sitting in your team right now, and those all-important regulatory or compliance demands.
And maybe a final thought or perhaps a question for you to chew on after this. While those immediate cost savings of DIY look really tempting on paper, what is the true potential long-term cost if security vulnerabilities creep in because the internal expertise wasn't quite deep enough? Or what's the cost of significant implementation delays? But then flip that coin again. How much strategic value could you gain down the road from building that deep in-house PAM expertise, even if it means a slower, maybe more challenging initial rollout? So it's about evaluating not just the immediate project needs, but also thinking about future scalability, long-term maintenance, and the overall strategic implications of either path for your organization's security posture years from now. Is it a short-term saving or is it a long-term investment in capability?
That is definitely a lot to chew on, but hopefully this deep dive has given you a much clearer roadmap, a better framework for making that crucial decision between professional services and DIY for your PAM implementation. We've explored the benefits, the cons, the ideal scenarios for both. Keep diving deep into knowledge, keep asking the right questions, and we'll catch you on the next one.